First and Now is the official BC Lions podcast, back to the scene of the crime. It will have been 1 year less a day, 364 days between Western Finals in Winnipeg. This time we've got some new fog gray uniforms. We'll have a different quarterback behind center, a leading CFL passer under center. Lions and Bombers, they've been on the collision course ever since the start of the year. Nick Kowalski is to my right. Matt Baker, yours truly. Great to be back on First and Now. We're going to tee up the Western Final, but we're doing this on the heels of an impressive Western semifinal win over the Calgary Stampeders. Lots to be excited about this week.
Yeah, a little bit of deja vu, right? Like you said, going and beating Calgary again felt just as good eliminating them as it did last season. And now the task at hand is the David, right? Like the giant, the beast that's been these past couple of years in Winnipeg. But taking care of business at home, our best players were our best players. You're talking Vernon Adams Jr., Keon Hatcher, Gary Peters, Matthew Betts, the list goes on. And it was just a fun afternoon at BC Place. Yeah,
we'll start with that. We're going to talk to our pal Hustler Paterson from Winnipeg Sports Talk. Has done a great job sort of staying in the spotlight and in Winnipeg sports media there since the demise of TSN radio in that market, much like our friends Sakaris and Price, Donnie and Dolly here. But we'll kick around Calgary here. Yes, a little interesting to start. The Stampeders, to their credit, took the ball, marched right down, 3 plays in the end zone, 2 long passes, maybe a little bit of miscommunication in the middle of the Lions secondary on the Reggie Begelton touchdown. But a Gary Peters interception is what really turned the momentum early. And we said on this podcast a week ago, Nick, that we'll be talking about Vernon Adams Jr. in the event of a win, and boy, are we ever. A playoff passing record for the Lions, 413 passing yards, and great for VA, reminding everyone that he was the top passer in the league this season.
Yeah, like there was any doubt, right? Like it's been a legacy game for Vernon Adams Jr. He goes over 450 total yards too, using his legs, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever they needed it. It seemed like there were multiple first and 20s VA got them out of, with whether it was with his arm or with his legs too, right? And just some magnificent plays. Never let his foot off the gas either, and it was great to see. It's why they brought Vernon Adams Jr. in last season and put their eggs in his basket for moments like this.
And it's interesting, it'll be an interesting story to sort of rehash, should this season end a certain way with a parade about how, Vernon Adams Jr., it's remarkable how he was available on the trade market. Remember, it was a stopgap, and it ended up being one because Nathan Rourke came back. And full credit to Nathan for willing his way through a Western semi win over Calgary, and may have struggled a bit early on in Winnipeg, but this team was in that game in the fourth quarter. All kinds of momentum swings in that one. But yeah, Vernon Adams Jr. is now the face of this franchise, and it's always remarkable. He has another one of these receivers sort of step up and lead the charge. Keon Hatcher goes for 195 and a touchdown, 9 receptions. And who knows who that will be this week. I'm looking for a Dominique Rhymes, a Javon Catoy, a Justin McInnes, maybe one of those guys. But it's going to take a complete effort in all 3 phases. But yeah, you have to admire the way this team stepped up.
Yeah, and I think based off that, like there was a scare early on when Calgary takes a 7-0 lead. The BC goes 2-0, and suddenly Calgary has the ball back again. But it's Gary Peters making a veteran savvy play, jumping that under route, and holding on to the ball after a pretty heavy friendly fire collision with Ben Hladek.
Yeah,
Gary was banged up after that, but he toughed it out. And I know you've talked about plenty of times that Gary's one of the most durable BC Lions players there is, right? 18 games straight for years now. But
since 2018, every year, yeah.
But you needed that, right? Like it felt like especially around August when the Lions sort of weren't really closing out games or just came on the wrong side of some outcomes. They just weren't getting that turnover, that key play to shift the momentum, and Gary Peters did that. It was early, but it played a huge part in that win.
Yes, and 41-30 and 28-13 at halftime. I remember thinking it doesn't even seem that close. And ultimately, Calgary did everything they could to try to get back into it. They get a fumble recovery in that third quarter, but This Ryan Phillips defense has a bit of swagger back, held Calgary to 5 field goals in between their opening touchdown and one at the end when it was too late. Marcus Sales sealing it with an interception. Josh Woods stepping up, 11 tackles, one of those a big one for a loss, which forced Calgary to kick one of those field goals in the third quarter. So different guys stepping up at multiple positions. And on the linebacker front, we're not expecting to have Ben Hladek. Something could change in the next day or two, but Ben Hladek, a non-participant in practice. Same with Jack Hinsberger, a very scary incident there, his hit on the Peyton Logan return, and great to hear that both players are okay and they walked off under their own power, but I think it's going to take a miracle here for Hinsberger to play this week. Should the Lions advance, I would think Hladek and Hinsberger both become a factor, but just too little time here to turn around before this game to really be optimistic. So, and that's going to be the status quo. Josh Woods getting reps in the middle means Bo Lacumbo slides back down to start at will. This is why depth is key, Nick, when you overcome these injuries.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because when, at least in my case, when the game's on, I'm not looking at my phone and looking at the box score. I don't know the stats going on, but when I'm filming, I saw number 2 on BC and Josh Woods pop up a lot in my frame, and I'm thinking like he's been around the ball a lot today. And then suddenly right after the game, you're looking 11 tackles, several go for a loss, several in key situations on a guy like Kadeem Carey too, who ended up not being too much of a factor in that game. But at the same time, the Lions, I felt like, at least on defense, the Lions' best players were their best players on Saturday.
Yeah.
Matthew Betts had 10 total pressures. That doubled any Lions player in the game. And
Menard had a big sack. Yeah,
Gary Peters, I was looking at the PFF numbers. Gary Peters was the highest graded cornerback amongst the weekend too. So you lean to your best guys in November. It's a template Winnipeg's found a ton of success in the past, right? And it's great to see the Lions team doing the same down the stretcher.
Yeah, I was buzzing there for a couple days, but now it's kind of recharge, refocus. We have a couple minutes here before we'll welcome in Hustler Patterson. Winnipeg, the good news. The forecast looks very, very, it's not going to be a factor, the weather is what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to spit out here. I think we have a high of 0, a low of -4, -5. The wind, remember, it's a 5:30 kickoff there, so the wind might play a role, especially when we get later. Maybe it's a situation whoever wins the toss defers if they elect to have the wind in the fourth quarter. Could be one of those games, right? But from a weather standpoint, it'll be a lot like last year. And it's funny, I was watching snippets of last year's final. Watching that, it looked a lot colder watching that than it was actually being there.
100%.
Like some snow was coming down in the second half when Terry returned the missed convert, right? Was kind of starting to come down a little bit, but bring it on, man. These two Western heavyweights, this Lions team proved back in week 3. It's a long time ago. They can go in there and get it done, but obviously a different element altogether here now.
Yeah, it's still then the one thing that doesn't change. The weather is whatever, but and it seems like it's not going to be a big deal. But going in to that environment, it's always tough, right? And that's why it was even more impressive. I felt that when Vernon did go into that environment in Winnipeg this year and came out with a 30-6 victory, Winnipeg not finding the end zone at all in that game.
Right.
So that's what's going to be the real challenge is, dealing with the crowd noise, dealing with all the adversity of taking down Winnipeg in a place they've been completely dominant in the last several years. But it's why you sign up for these moments.
Yep, this will be the 3rd consecutive Western final in Winnipeg. They struggled to take out Saskatchewan there in 2021. We were talking a little bit about that. Some first quarter turnovers, 3 of them, and I think the Riders actually took a lead into that fourth quarter. Lions led last year's game very briefly. Remember, Winnipeg scored the opening drive touchdown, missed the convert, and then after the fumbled punt by Grant, Betts almost took it in, and then Pipkin scored. Lions actually led 7-6 for a bit, but so many momentum swings in that first half alone. This team is more primed this year, I think, having been there, done that, they know what it's like to come up short. They just have to go and leave it all out there, and looking forward to seeing how they respond. We'll talk a little bit more about this game with Hustler Patterson here in just a minute. Talk a little bit about the East Division. I've had a chance to catch up on what happened with Hamilton and Montreal. Hard to do that live because we're getting ready for our game here. But more on the Western Final coming up with our pal Hustler. All right, to the Manitoba capital we go. Our good friend Andrew Hustler Patterson joins us here on First and Now. For those watching this, he's got the pretty good setup there. I don't know if that's just a fancy backdrop or if that's his office. Huss, what's going on, bud?
Welcome to WSTHQ, Bakes. Yeah, well, what's going on is we got a big game on Saturday, and it's great to catch up with our old pal Nick and my old pal Matt and chop it up before the game that we've been waiting for months, to be honest. The season series between these two teams was legendary, and there's only one way to determine the best in the West, and that's go at it one more time with a trip to the Grey Cup on the line. I can tell you the city's ready to go. We've got a pretty nice snowstorm happening right now, although I don't think it's going to be too crazy. We'll maybe get an update while we're talking here on that. But hey, this is the way it was supposed to be, right? I mean, I think we all knew that these two teams were in a class above the rest of the Western Division, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, I think all year was kind of trending. There's a big three. Obviously, Toronto Argonauts doing what only one other team ever did, 16-2, and these two heavyweights in the West. So, talking about this Bomber team, I think one of the things that has been constant in this run of success has been their ability to win games in different ways. I mean, we saw Zach and the offense chew up yards in that comeback here a few weeks ago. We've seen stifling defense. I think that 2021 championship, the strength of that team was the defense. Maybe last year they were a little more balanced. What has been the most impressive aspect of them this year, Hustler?
You know what, Bakes? I think, you kind of nailed it. Their ability to win games in different ways. But also they're just an unrelenting level of belief in each other. No matter what the circumstances are. And there was no better example of that than in the rubber match between these two teams at BC Place a few weeks back. I mean, that was a game that, BC was playing at a really high level, and the Bombers certainly had made plays, but they found themselves down late. And even after Caleros got sacked and turned the football over, from talking to the players, there was never any wavering in the belief that they would be able to hang in there and potentially, win that football game. And they did. As far as the X's and O's go, though, of this team so far, I mean, listen, there's been so many different contributors on defense, and you can't win without a strong defense. But to me, I mean, listen, we're going to be talking a lot about this Grey Cup week, regardless of what happens this week in Winnipeg, because, of course, Brady Oliveira is up for the MOP in the West. The Bombers' ability to finish off opponents, if you will, in the fourth quarter, running the football. There's been a couple, like 2-3 games where, I mean, the Bombers, with not big leads, have taken the football and eaten up 9-10 minutes of clock, moved the ball down and, scored, or at least did what they need to do to put themselves in a much more advantageous position. A lot of credit goes to the offensive line without, obviously Brady Oliveira as well. But the buy-in from every player on that offense. I mean, I think about guys like Rashid Bailey that might not show up on the stat sheet as much, but are really, really impactful in that running game. I mean, this team, I think when they smell blood and they're in a position, they've won enough games, they've won championships, they've done this before. But the way they were able to take that running game to another level behind the incredible season of Oliveira at the most important times in the games, I think has been something that maybe sets this year's group apart from some other years, and that includes years with Andrew Harris and Brady last time. I mean, but it's gotten better this year, and it's a big reason why it's not a quarterback up for MOP, I think, at the end of the year.
Very quickly, I see Ed Tate earlier tweeting some updates. BlueBombers.com does an excellent job with their written content. No Dalton Schoen today, not a surprise. That guy might need some work in order to have a shot here to play. But Rasheed Bailey, nothing new on him, so assume he's good to go. But Dalton Schoen specifically, how would Winnipeg sort of shuffle the deck there if he's not going?
Well, I mean, it's a great question because we will be waiting to see. I'll say this. Mike O'Shea, who is, as Nick knows very well, about as guarded as they come on giving anybody any information, was on his call-in show last night, and this lady Gail sort of really pressed him on it. I don't know whether she buttered him up, but she actually seemed to get more out of him than any of the media around here have been able to. And, it was far from saying, hey, don't worry about Dalton, he'll be fine. But I really did get a sense that there is a level of optimism that he'll be able to contribute in this game on Saturday. I mean, how well-founded that is from a call-in show, I don't know. We'll see. But he certainly didn't indicate that, their plans are to go without him. And if he's there, it'll be a surprise. We all know we're going to find out on Saturday. Mike O'Shea, that will be it. If Dalton Schoen can't go, listen, it, puts a lot more on Nick Dembski, who didn't practice today. It certainly puts a heck of a lot more on Kenny Lawler. Not that he can't shoulder the load as one of the best receivers in this game, but I was chopping it up with my partner on the lock shop, Dustin Nielsen from TSN, who's going to be calling this game. And, we were going through the receivers on both sides of the football. And if you include Dalton Schoen, you can make an argument that this West final will include arguably 6 of the top dozen receivers in the entire league.
Easily.
I mean, the receiving cores on both sides of this line of scrimmage are absolutely insane. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, Dalton Schoen, 2 of the greatest debut seasons in CFL history. I think 26 touchdowns. He has such a great connection with Zach Caleros. If he's not able to go, absolutely, that's going to be significant for the Bombers. I think the one thing that both teams would say if one of their top receivers was out, though, both teams are built with a great level of depth, and there'll be other guys that, will be ready to step up and try and do the job. But he's a very, very tough guy to replace, as the numbers will tell you.
Hustler, then on defense too, everyone knows Willie Jefferson, Adam Bighill, DeMario Houston's even made a name for himself this year across the country, but there's some new names in that defense this past year. And who have kind of been those under the radar stars on the Winnipeg unit this year?
Who has, absolutely stood out to me, Nick, and credit to the voters. I'm not sure who selects the all-star teams, but the year that Evan Holm has had for the Blue Bombers in the secondary has been, far more than I think a lot of people expected right out of the gate. He has been such an important player at big times in games. That I think has developed more and more confidence playing at that level throughout the year, and obviously got the all-star nod, and very, very much deserved. So I think Holm certainly is a guy that probably stands out amongst the usual suspects, if you will. There's been a number of guys that have come in when guys have been out, but listen, when we're talking about this Blue Bomber defense, it will go as the big boys take them. And listen, Jackson Jeffcoat, they've really, really handled him with kid gloves, if you will. Didn't play in that last game. He missed some time earlier this season. And while he hasn't been out there for 18 games, when he has been out there, he still is arguably the biggest difference maker on the Blue Bomber defense. So, it's going to be about Willie J. It's going to be about Biggie. It'll certainly be about Jackson Jeffcoat. But I really think that their ability to get to the quarterback, and maybe not necessarily, be sacking Vernon Adams, but I think what they have to do is almost some of those mush rushes where, you're not necessarily selling out to try to sack the quarterback, but getting in a position where a guy like Willie can just get his arms up and bat the thing down. the key thing is not over pursuing. I mean, if there's one thing about the Bomber defense this year that has been problematic at times against games against Toronto, against Edmonton, as well as against BC, sometimes those guys up front, they see the quarterback. I mean, they're like sharks. And the minute a quarterback like a VA makes a move, all of a sudden there is a lot of room. And you're talking about 20 and 25-yard gains. So I think those guys in the secondary are going to be tested. Evan Holmes certainly is going to need to have a game up to the standard that he's set so far this year. And I think the ability of the Bombers on the defensive line to, I mean, listen, you're not going to stop Vernon Adams, especially the way he's playing right now and what we saw on the weekend against the Calgary Stampeders. But if they can play smart and just not, I mean, essentially keep their contain of VA, and put a little more pressure potentially on the secondary with balls being thrown, but not allow those big chunk runs that can often really take the wind, the wind out of the sails of a defense.
I know too, we've talked about how Winnipeg on offense, one of their more stronger aspects is they can win in different ways. But in your opinion, what's the most dangerous offense? Is it the one with Collaros airing it out, or is it the one with Brady Oliveira running every time for 6-7 yards?
Well, you know what? A great question, Nick. And I guess I'll kind of put it back to you is, when are we talking about? Is this, in the first half when the teams are feeling each other out? Because I think at that point, it's the air game of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's Zach Collaros connecting with those receivers. But in the second half of the game, and who knows? I mean, we'll see what the conditions are like, because again, this is going to be a far cry from inside the dome or the game that these two teams played at IG Field in the middle of summer when it was beautiful out. I mean, this is Winnipeg in the middle of November. You know it very well. The ability to run the football and kind of win that battle on the line of scrimmage by the Bomber offensive line and offense, I think is going to be crucial. And if we're talking about a game that I think most agree should be tight and should be close in the second half, I have a feeling this team will lean more on their horse in the backfield in Brady Oliveira than needing big plays. I mean, hey, listen, if BC gets up, we know what's going to happen. I mean, you can't run the football as much if you got a bunch of ground to make up, and Zach Collaros has shown that. But put it this way, if the Bombers are able to run the football effectively, win the time of possession battle, move the chains in the second half with the lead, that probably is the signature of this year's Blue Bomber team, and certainly one that would bode well for their hopes of getting to Hamilton.
How big special teams do you expect to play a role here? Remember, all kinds of motivation swings in last year's game in the first half alone. Grant took one to the house. Each team had a couple of takeaways, I think, at least one each, at least an interception on both sides. James Butler fumble as well. Such a crazy opening 30 minutes. But, you can argue the Lions kick coverage teams under Mike Benavides a little more sound this year, but that Janarian Grant guy is capable of turning a game on a dime. You expect him to get his opportunities here?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think back to, his impact in the West Final a couple years ago against the Riders. I mean, he is an absolute game changer, Bakes. And listen, when he was out for a part of the year, they didn't really have an answer. I mean, that was a big story through the middle part of the season, heading, onto the other side of Labor Day, is when's Janarian Grant going to be back? And I think where the Bombers were at that point, I think they knew very well that this division was coming down to a game between the BC Lions and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They were going to figure out where that was going to be. But regardless of where the game was going to be played, they needed a healthy Janarian Grant. And it looks like they'll have that. Don't be surprised as well, especially if Dalton Schoen doesn't go. If Buck Pierce utilizes Janarian a little bit more in the offense that he has been before. I mean, he's one of these guys that if you can get him the ball with a little bit of space, he can turn that into a massive play. So as far as Grant goes, he's good to go. That's a huge asset for the Bombers. But you know what? I think both of the kick coverage teams are quite similar. Great athletes, pretty consistent throughout the season. And then you look at the kicking game. Jamison Sheehan has been I mean, a really interesting punter to watch this year. I mean, he has so many different clubs in his bag, to use a golf term. I mean, he can smack one, sky high. He can direct one that doesn't go more than 15 yards up. So I think like that sort of versatility certainly will help the Bombers. But let's face it, we know when you have two great teams like this playing in what we all expect to be a really, really close game, it's very likely, in fact, that this could come down to the performances of the two kickers. And honest to God, I can't remember a kicking matchup where both guys were so close to the top of their level right now. I mean, we saw Medlock do it a long time, Nick, when you were here, but it was always like Medlock was like a huge advantage for the Bombers. I think you would say that about Shaun White against just about anybody else in the league. But then you look at what the luchador Sergio Castillo has been able to do this year, and he's had an absolutely monster season. And if anything, there might listen, I think we all agree that Shaun White has had a historically good year and is the clear-cut favorite, I believe, for the Special Teams Player of the Year. I will remind everybody, though, that kicking in Winnipeg in November is not the same as the Dome.
Different.
And the one thing that might benefit Castillo is the fact that he has been kicking here and was out there for a huge performance in a game that really meant nothing for the Bombers, but it was in a lot of ways a dress rehearsal in that final regular season game against Calgary. And he, I believe, went 5 for 5 in that game. So both teams have incredible confidence in their kickers. And we'll talk about the returners on both sides. I think that the special teams, like the coverage units, that's where the pressure is going to be on both of these teams. And listen, if one team can break one and the other doesn't, God knows if there's a turnover on special teams either way. I mean, I really think of these teams as so good and so evenly matched that often can be the difference between winning and losing when the stakes are so high and it's one game for all the marbles in the division.
So on Saturday at 8:30 p.m., the BC Lions will win this game if, and then I want you to answer the other side of that question, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will win this game if.
Well, I mean, listen, I think the Lions win this game if Vernon Adams plays at his highest level. I mean, I can't imagine them coming in and winning this game if VA isn't the best version of VA. And he certainly looked like that and was ready to do it. I think the BC Lions win this football game if not only they can do that, but they are able to, make Winnipeg a one-dimensional offense, which is certainly easier said than done. And also, I would say the Lions have a much better chance of winning if they're playing with the lead, because as we've talked about, the Bombers are incredible playing with the lead, especially in these conditions in a playoff game where they can really lean on that. I mean, turnovers, the other thing that goes without saying, either of these teams can win the game if they have a decisive battle, if they have a decisive win in the turnover battle. And I mean, I know that's very elementary and very simple, but that's because it's true. And if you look at these games over and over again, I mean, it can be mistakes. Like, put it this way, if the Bombers come out like they did against the Riders and turn the football over 5 times in the first half, I don't think that their defense, you could possibly expect them to hold them in that game the way they did in that West Final a couple years ago. And for the Bombers, I think they will be going to the Grey Cup if they execute the way we have seen them do in these big games before over the last 4 or 5 years, and do the things that makes them have made them the team to beat for the last 5 seasons. Obviously, a solid game from Zach Caleros where they take care of the football, and then the strong running game. And really, this comes down to maybe the oldest football cliche, but it really is the line of scrimmage, guys. The ability for the offensive lines to win those battles. In BC's case, I mean, I think it would be great to establish the run with more than just VA, and they'll be looking to do that. But to have that as a threat, which I think gives him a little bit more time to find receivers, to throw the football, they got to be able to protect him. And from a Bomber side of things, I mean, if Brady Oliveira gets rolling downhill the way he has been in the second half of this season, going for 7 and 8 yards in a playoff game, that really can take a toll on a defense. So ball possession, not turning the football over, and keeping your offense off the field and the high-powered offense on the other side, regardless of teams we're talking about, I think are big-time keys to the game.
Yep, if the Lions can get any run game going, that would certainly increase their chances. Hustler, this has been great. Before we're done here, though, of course, you and I go back a long time. Radio Rows, Super Bowls. You had to find my wedding ring for me one time. We'll save that story for the next time we do an interview. That's a true story, folks. Yourself and Gary Lawless back in the day, but like in this market here, the TSN radio network, it was no longer a thing, and proud to see you're still doing your thing on your own platform. Give our listeners and viewers a quick plug. Winnipeg Sports Talk. How often and where do they find it?
Yeah, I mean, we've basically taken our old show from the TSN airwaves, changed it up a little bit, but still cranking out 2+ hours of live content Monday to Friday, focusing on our Winnipeg teams this week. I mean, the Jets obviously are a big part of the show. But the number one story in this city going into Saturday is the Bombers and the Lions playing for a trip to the Grey Cup. We're live at 1 Central on YouTube every day at Winnipeg Sports Talk. Find us on YouTube, hit us with a sub. So that's 11 a.m. in Vancouver. Great show for especially Winnipeg expats that kind of want to stay connected with what's happening in and around here. And then shortly after the end of the show, the podcast is uploaded. So if you're more an audio listener, go to wherever you find your favorite podcast. Just type in Winnipeg Sports Talk and find us there. It's going to be fun, guys. I'm looking forward to seeing both of you there. And Bakes, I was telling you before we went on, when the BC Lions came in and opened up a can of whoop-ass on the Bombers earlier this year in what was, I mean, let's face it, a huge win for BC, an announcement win that the Lions were legit challengers to the Bombers in the West, and I think a bit of a wake-up call for Winnipeg. I was sitting about 20 rows up on the east side, and I saw my pal Bakes with the biggest freaking smile on his face, just peacocking up and down the sidelines. And listen, that was very well deserved. That was very, very well deserved. And you could see how much that win meant to win meant everywhere. I mean, to everyone on that sideline. And then we saw the Bombers step it up and do the exact same thing later on. The third game between these teams, the one game they played in BC, literally an all-time classic, one of the best regular season games we've seen in the CFL in ages. And that's before we even talk about the significance of it. So let's do it one more time for West supremacy. The Bombers, who have sort of been the standard for a number of years, and the BC Lions, who have a hell of a football team and are knocking on the door. I cannot wait for 5:30 on Saturday night, guys. And listen, I would be facetious if I said good luck, but let's see a great game. Obviously, I'll be pulling for the blue and gold. You guys have your allegiances with the Leos, but it's this is what the CFL is all about. IG Field in November, with two of the best teams in the league playing, with the chance to get their hands on the Grey Cup the following week.
Well said, my friend. We'll see you at the Rum Hut.
Take it easy, fellas. Have a
Thanks,
great
Hustler.
week.
Great seeing you.
Safely.
Cheers. Outstanding breakdown. Hustler should talk a bit more. He should go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, he's got a career in that.
No, I'm kidding. He had brilliant stuff, and I was peacocking. I've never heard that term. What does that mean?
I think you were kind of
was
Conor McGregor.
Was I strutting around?
Yeah,
was I?
I might have had that vibe too. I think we all did on June 22nd, and that's what we're trying to get back to.
We'd be lying if we said we were expecting that game to go that way. Not saying that these guys weren't capable of it, but yeah, okay. It was a pretty good vibe that night, but then boy, oh boy, when we went back, it was back down to earth real quick. But the good news is none of that matters now. The win there, the 2 losses, it's over. It's a 1-game season, as they say. Lions and Bombers, 2:30 pregame on AM 730 with Moj and Julio. And I know you and I both rewatched the broadcast. There was something from the spider cam you picked up from the Lions and the Stampeders.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring this up in the middle of the second quarter. The spider cam's like that overhead camera you get where you see all the behind the quarterback and offensive line plays. It's a really cool angle. But there was a moment in the second quarter where the play call got picked up where VA's in the huddle and he's barking out all his 20 different words and terminologies that get announced to the offensive guys. And Nielsen and Suter kind of said, "Okay, you got that?" And Suter's like, "Yep, I exactly know what's going to happen here." But I thought it just showed that. I don't think Jordan Maxinik and the coaches are probably too pleased that it got out and have to kind of revise that moving forward. But I thought it just showed that, sometimes you see these players and they catching around a football at the end of the day, but you don't see all the meetings and the preparation that all season long, not even all season, but all year long that go into this. I even think back to Tacoma when we were able to sit inside a quarterback and receiver meeting, and you see a guy like Lucky White, you see him on the sideline and he's eating gummies and smiling and dancing and all that, but you go inside a meeting and he's one of the leaders in that meeting, breaking it down, using his terminology of why we should do this with this route and what will happen if we do this. And just like it just shows that you can't just go out there and pick it up and prepare to execute or expect to execute, right? You have to put in the hours and be really intelligent in terms of how to know your craft and all of that. So I thought that was a cool moment. That I know they used to do those wired moments where they pick it up.
I'm looking at my wristband. You see VA, all the quarterbacks, they look at the wristband. It's you're saying wired? Sorry?
They used to do that, right? Remember they had the quarterbacks wired like live during the game?
The live mics, yes. Yes, not in the last couple years, but...
Good 5 years ago, at least.
Yeah. Sean White, by the way, will be mic'd up for CFL Wired on... that could be big. If it ends a certain way, that could be big. So,
well, we often say that these games come down to the final play, right? And it's two teams, you can't really pick an advantage on either side, right? And as Hustler said, it's two of the best place kickers in this league, and Sergio Castillo and Sean White. So a Sean White walk-off Wired is just that's a good thought.
Hey, sign me up, man. Sign me up. He did it in Hamilton, and you probably have to kick a big one in the fourth quarter. You never know. So that's the second game. I don't know how many players will be focused on it, but we'll know when our game starts who's going to the Grey Cup from the East. Toronto, Montreal, the Argos swept those 3 regular season meetings, and we've talked about the Alouettes. I think that they have the horses to really make this a good one. Not necessarily saying I'm going to pick them to come out on top, but you see their defense make a big statement early, a takeaway. Hamilton was primed to get points off the start, and that kind of set the stage for how that game was going to be. The Alouettes 11-7, but all those losses coming to Toronto times 3, Lions and Bombers times 2. So Montreal clearly in the second tier below those other 3 teams. But again, this is a new season now, and I'm wondering just how interesting this one might be. But there's no knocking that Toronto's the clear-cut favorite in this division.
100%, but it's at the same time, it's why you play the game. Hustler, he brought this up, the 2021 West Final, where Winnipeg was a complete dominant team all season long, got their SM starters down the stretch, and Sask rolls in, and suddenly 5 turnovers later in the first half, Sask has a second half lead against the Bombers, and Winnipeg ultimately prevails. But this shows that, especially a team like Montreal, you said, like, I think the formula, or we go back to that question, the Montreal Alouettes will go to the Grey Cup if. I think they need a defensive score at the minimum.
Or at least a turnover to set up Fajardo and them deep in Toronto
red zone,
territory.
They need something like that.
Need a game-changing play. Yeah.
And they have the horses to do that at all 3 levels. They have studs throughout the, Lemonator still doing his thing. Dequois, one of the best safeties, Beverett, the MODP. So they definitely got horses, but
Austin Mack, a phenomenal player. Just a phenomenal. I know you like him too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We saw him up and close in Montreal this season, but Toronto, they've done it all year with their top guys are best of the best, and they have incredible depth. That's what kind of kept them alive to go 16-2 this season. And I don't know, there's a scenario where they can become, when it's all said and done, one of the greatest teams of all time. But I think Vernon Adams Jr. and company will have something to say about that if that moment comes up.
That would be fantastic to get that opportunity. Alouettes, Argos at noon, Lions and Bombers at 3:30, AM 7:30, 2:30, Moj and Julio pregame show. Keep it tuned at bclions.com. All of our content, website, game trailers, we have it all. Working on some bonus trailers too, so stay tuned on that. And we'll talk next week, hopefully, from Hamilton. First and Now, your official BC Lions podcast.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.